A message brought to you by Oasis Christian Fellowship, standing on the Word of God, proclaiming the full gospel.
Last week, we began looking at a passage in Romans chapter 5. And we saw in this passage there were 4 words that were used to describe our condition before Christ. 4 words that paint a complete picture of who we were. And Paul calls us, in this one passage, calls us lovely words like weak, ungodly, sinners, and enemies. Last week we looked at the first 2, the weak and the ungodly. And what we saw was these 2 words describe what was absent in us. These were the 2 things that we absolutely lacked in full. We lacked the strength to save ourselves. We were like someone who'd fallen overboard. Safety was right there. We couldn't reach it on our own. We couldn't physically pull ourselves out of the water. And we lacked any reverence for the God who could save us. And we saw, though, all of it was complete willing ignorance. We chose to be ignorant of God because we had no excuse before God. None whatsoever. We saw that all creation cries out that there is a creator. We saw that the law of God has been written on our heart and it burned within us. And despite all of that, we still turned our backs on God anyway. That was our weakness. That was our ungodliness. That's what was absent in us. But today, we come to the next 2 words. Because if last week felt a little bit uncomfortable, this week's probably going to feel a little bit more uncomfortable. Because it's not a case of what we were now lacking. These next 2 words described what we were. What was active within us. What was present within us. You see, it's one thing to say we lacked something. Oh, I didn't have enough strength. Oh, I just didn't have enough reverence. It almost makes us sound like we're the victims of circumstance. But Scripture doesn't let us off that easy. Because it wasn't just that good things were absent. It's a case of, well, if something's absent, what was in their place? We didn't have strength, we didn't have reverence, but what did we have instead? The first one, we were sinners. Scripture states it plainly. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Now you can look for a long, long time. There's no asterisk. There's no terms and conditions. There's no exception to this. It is simply that all have sinned. No exceptions. There's no pretty good people who almost made it. Every single person has fallen short. Every single person has missed the mark. And what was the mark? The perfect standard of God. And we didn't just miss the mark by 1 or 2 feet, you know. That gap between us and God's perfect standard, it was an infinite, uncrossable by man. It was an infinite chasm. And we may think, though, well, okay, fair enough. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but I've done some good things in my life, haven't I? And you know what? You probably have. And I bet actually you've probably done more good things than you even remember. But here's the thing. Just because we were sinners, it didn't mean we couldn't do good. We could still do good. Why? Because we bore God's image within us. Well, here's where so many people in fact get mixed up. They imagine salvation like a set of scales. You've got your good deeds on one side and your bad deeds on another. And as long as the good outweighs the bad, you're golden. Yeah, I've done some things I'm not proud of. But I've helped people. I've been kind. I've tried my best. And then we think somehow at the end of the day, that scale's going to balance out, or even there'll be a bit more good than bad, and the scale will tip to our advantage. Here's the problem. That's not how it works. It's never how it's worked. You see, sin isn't just a bad deed that can get cancelled out by a good deed. Sin carries an infinite weight. One sin, just one sin, and the scales don't just tip, they shatter. You can't balance infinity. You know, you could be a walking saint. Never set a foot wrong before man. Spend your whole life in giving and selflessness. And the scales will still never balance. Think of it like this. Imagine somebody owes you £1 million. And they come to you and say, look, I know I owe you a lot of money here. I owe you £1 million. But just hear me out. Yesterday, I helped someone in need. And last week, I gave money to a charity. And the week before, I walked out of a shop without paying. And I realised that I went back and I made it all right and gave them double. And they'll say to you, doesn't all of that count for something? What would you say to them? You say, well, you're clearly trying hard to be good. It's all good stuff. You still owe me £1 million. Good deeds cannot remove that verse. Good deeds cannot pay the price of sin. They never could and they never will. In fact, it gets worse. Isaiah 64 says this, but we are all like an unclean thing, and all our righteousnesses are like filthy rags. Did you catch that? It doesn't say our sin is like a filthy rag. It says our righteousness are like filthy rags. Do you know what that means? The best things that we can do. Our finest moments of selflessness, our greatest acts of kindness are like filthy rags. Why? Because even our best moments were tainted by sin. Tainted by pride, by mixed motives, by self-interest. We were so pathetic, we couldn't even do good purely. But we need to be careful. I don't want to go too far in one direction. That's not to say our good deeds are worthless in themselves. What I'm saying is, it's saying that when you are offering the good deeds as a payment for sin, they're useless. It's like trying to pay that £1 million debt with €1 million. You're not even dealing with the right currency. No matter how many good works you do, no matter how high you pile them up, the scales will never balance in your favour because you're working with the wrong currency. Why? Why can't our good deeds balance out these scales of sin? Sin wasn't just something we did. It was who we were. We were more than just people who occasionally sin. It described our very form, our very core. We weren't just good people who sometimes missed the mark. We were sinners. In Psalm 51, behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. From conception, the very beginning, born into sin. We didn't become sinners when we committed our first sin. It was in our blood. It was in our bones. It was woven into who we were. Nobody had to teach us how to sin. Nobody sat down as a little boy or a little girl and gave them lessons how to teach or how to be selfish or how to lie. We worked all that out on our own. We were sinners through and through. Jeremiah 17 says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Our hearts weren't just flawed. They were deceitful and desperately wicked. We couldn't even trust our own hearts to do the right thing. But it says, let's jump back. If we go back there, it says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Who have we sinned though against? Have you thought about that? When you sin, who is it actually against? Think about David. You know the story of David and Bathsheba from 2 Samuel 11? David was king of Israel, and one evening he saw a woman bathing. Her name was Bathsheba, and while she was married to a soldier in the army, and the man was called Uriah. And while Uriah was fighting away the king's battles, David got his soldiers to bring Bathsheba to him. And she couldn't really say, thanks but no thanks, that's a kind offer. He was the king. You don't refuse the king. And when she came to the palace, David committed adultery with her. And she became pregnant. So, a rather embarrassing situation, the pregnancy had to be hidden. And Uriah, the husband, he was away at war. Everyone knew that the child wouldn't be his. So what happened? David had Uriah brought back from the battlefield. And he said, there's your wife. Go be with her. Go spend the night with her. Then people think the child was Uriah's. But Uriah refused. He slept at the palace gate instead. So David tried again, gave him a big meal, got him drunk, but even drunk, Uriah wouldn't go home still. He wouldn't enjoy the comforts of home while his fellow soldiers were dying in a war. David's cover-up had failed completely. So he tried another way. He had Uriah placed in the front lines of battle, where he knew Uriah would be killed rather quickly. And then that David took Bathsheba as his wife. And with that, the child would be seen as legitimate. Now think of who Uriah wronged there. Who David you wronged there. Uriah was dead, murdered. Bathsheba had lost her husband. 2 families destroyed. And his generals, they knew exactly what David had done. They knew why Uriah had been sent to the front lines. They knew that the king was sending an innocent man to his death. His reputation among the people ruined. They say, this is our king. Look at what he's done. Now imagine this though. David spent the rest of his life never putting a foot wrong. Imagine he did great deeds dedicated to everyone who he hurt. Kindness and generosity without measure. Imagine he made amends to everyone he could. Imagine at the end of the day, every single person who wronged him would look him in the eye and say, David, you're forgiven. Would that cover it? No. Because when David came before God, look at what he said. Against you and you only have I sinned and done this evil in your sight. This is David's prayer to God. But really? Against you only? Really? Are you sure about that, David? What about Uriah? I think you might have done something against him. He's dead. What about Bathsheba, who's lost everything in her life? What about everyone else? You murdered a man, you destroyed families, you abused your power, you lied and you schemed. And you stand before God and say, I've only sinned against you. David understood something that we often miss though. All sin at its deepest level is ultimately against God. Every sin against a person is at first a sin against the God who made that person. You could get forgiveness from every human being who you have wronged, and your debt of sin would still stand before God. All our sin was against God. And that makes us something rather serious. Because the fourth word of our spiritual condition is that we're enemies. Enemies of God. We weren't indifferent to him. We were in active rebellion against the God who gave us our every breath. In Colossians 1 we read, and you who were once alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works. Our very thoughts that we had were acts of war against our Creator. And we kept fighting. We persisted. And more than that, we revelled at being at war with God. We ran from the light rather than towards it. Why? Because in John 3 we read, men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light. Why? Lest his deeds should be exposed. And we knew this. We knew we were weak. We knew we were ungodly. We knew we were sinners. But rather than reach for the hand that could save us, we swam away into the darkness. Because salvation meant surrender. And surrender meant giving up control. But in the darkness, we took the reins. In the darkness, we answered to no one but ourselves. And in that darkness, we built our own kingdoms and called ourselves gods of our own making. We lived as if we were the center of our universe. Every decision we made with reference to self and not God. What do I want? What suits me? What makes me happy? We sat on the throne of our lives and ruled it as we saw fit. We decided what was right. We decided what was wrong. And we decided what to do with everything God gave us. Our time, our money, our talents. As if they were ours to begin with. As if we made ourselves. Me, my, and I. That's how we lived. I want, I will, I'll have. Those words, I want, I will, I'll have, though, they didn't start with us, you know. Oh no, they were spoken a long time before humanity even drew their breath. Isaiah 14 says this, for you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Those are the words of the devil himself. A tiny glimpse into the original rebellion in heaven. But just look at those words. I will, I will, I will. 5 times, I will ascend, I will exalt my throne. I will sit, I will ascend, I will be like the Most High. It's all about I. The devil saw God's glory and thought, that should be mine. He saw God's throne and thought, I'd look good seated up there. He saw God's ruling and thought, my judgment is superior. And when we put ourselves in that center, when we said, I will do what I want, I will decide what's right, I will live how I please, we walk in the footsteps of Satan himself. But self wasn't our only idol. Where we saw God would reign in our lives, we replaced him with anything and everything. In Romans 1 we read, professing to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of an incorruptible God into an image made by corruptible man, and birds and 4-footed animals and creeping things. Do you see what's happened here? They took what was God's and changed it and exchanged it. They swapped it out. They took the glory that belonged to God and gave it to something else. This was deliberate. It was calculated. It was a betrayal. Think about what this means. There is a rightful king, and we took the crown from the one who deserves it and placed it on the head of a pretender. That's what we did. God alone is worthy of the throne. God alone deserves our worship, our allegiance, our devotion. And we took that throne, his throne, and gave it to something else, anything else, but not God. We crowned rivals in his place. We worshipped money, power, success, comfort, and we placed them on God's throne and said, that's the king. Every idol is a pretender to the throne of God. Every idol is a false king wearing a stolen crown. And we bowed to them. We served the idols of our lives. We worshipped those things that were not God. We gave all glory to them, what belonged to God alone. The problem was before Christ, there wasn't an empty throne in our lives. An empty throne had been neglect. The problem was it was a usurped throne. We handed the kingship of our lives to somebody or something else. And there is one word for that when somebody betrays its king. Treason. Treason leaves no room for fence sitting. You couldn't half betray a king. You cannot have two kings on one throne. Or as Jesus said, you cannot have two masters. Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. There's no neutral ground. Either Christ is king or he's not. And in our natural state, we were against him. Ephesians 2, we read, and you he made alive, who were dead in trespasses and sins, in which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience, among whom also we once conducted ourselves in the lusts of the flesh, fulfilling the desires of flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, just as the others. A rather long verse, but that captures absolutely everything we've talked about. Dead in sin, our weakness, our inability to save ourselves, walking according to the world, our ungodliness, conducting ourselves in the lust of the flesh, our sinfulness, following Satan as children of wrath, enmity against God. Weak, ungodly, sinners, enemies. That was us, our condition before Christ. 4 words, each one heavier than the last. But we need to understand, this isn't a progression. This isn't a journey that goes from bad to worse. Every person in their natural state before Christ is all 4 simultaneously. Weak, ungodly, sinners, and enemies of God. All at once. They are different sides of the same fallen condition. It's like someone who commits a crime against a king. You could say he's done something wrong. You could then say he's broke the law. You could then say he's committed treason. Or finally you could say he's declared war on the crown. Are there 4 different crimes? No. It's one act described with increasingly weighty language. That's what's happening here. Weak, ungodly, sinners and enemies of God. So sometimes, before we knew Christ, we may well have thought, well, I'm not that bad. Actually, you are. You were all 4. This isn't a grading scale. Every single one of us were one of these 4 at once. And it's not comfortable to hear. Because we'd rather think of ourselves as decent people who just need a little bit of help now and again. But Scripture doesn't give us that comfort. I'm not that bad. Yes, you are. You're an enemy of God. I'm better than most. Doesn't matter. There's still a king. And it's not God in your life. Why dwell, though, so much on what we were before Christ? Why spend 2 weeks looking at wicked and godly and then sinners and enemies? Why spend so long looking at what we were, looking at uncomfortable truths, making us put a mirror up to ourselves and saying, yes, I was weak. I couldn't save myself. Yes, I was ungodly. I lacked reverence. Yes, I was a sinner. Yes, I was an enemy of God. Why hold a mirror up and encourage us to accept that this is what we were? Because until we can understand and see the depth of our need, we would never grasp the height of God's grace. Do you understand? You can't value the pardon of God unless you realize the sentence that you're under. This is the thing. This is the while we were. While we were weak. While we were ungodly. While we were sinners. While we were enemies of God himself. While these things, the hopeless, helpless, hostile condition we were, God acted. While we were enemies to God himself, he acted on our behalf. Next week, we're going to look at exactly how and why God would act. But for now, let this sit in our hearts. That was us before Christ. And yet somehow, despite all of that, we were loved enough to be saved.